Hello, and welcome to the pilot episode of my new podcast series, Life According to a Middle Schooler. My name is Clark. I'm a middle schooler in New Hampshire, and today I will be talking about what this series is about, as well as our first topic, going back to school during the coronavirus pandemic. Throughout this series, we will take current events happening globally and explain them through a middle schooler's perspective. By doing this, we will be able to simplify the topics so younger students can understand them better. It will also provide adults with a way to explain these events to younger children while doing what some would call speaking the child's language. Lastly, and most importantly, the series will dive deep into topics to allow adults to see how kids feel about current events. Think of it as a news station run by kids, but more formal. Now that you understand the point of this new series, let's get straight into our first topic. Today, we will be talking about how kids are dealing with going back to school during the coronavirus pandemic. We will see how students are dealing with the stress of going back to school, what their opinion on the matter is, and what going back to school means in a public school standpoint as well as in a private school standpoint. First, we are going to talk about what all of this is really about. The coronavirus pandemic is a virus that has impacted billions of people. Since late in December 2019, almost 25 million people have been infected with the virus. Almost 850,000 people have died, and the virus has traveled to 188 countries. The most impacted country is the United States of America, which has over 5 million cases and almost 180,000 deaths. In March, most schools in the United States closed and went virtual. Now, after 3 months of online learning and a much-needed summer vacation, students are preparing to go back to school, both virtually, in-person, and hybrid. Whether a school is providing online or in-person classes varies from state to state, district to district, and school to school. Some schools have been going to school for almost a month already, while others have just barely started. In many states, after just a few days of in-person school, an outbreak occurred, resulting in many states having to go back to virtual. Luckily, students have already prepared for virtual learning from March to June. Some schools that have remained coronavirus-free have reported weeks of time to get used to this new way of going to school. New way of going to school could be a very vague term, but for the most part, it means always wearing a mask to class, quarantining 2 weeks before starting school, shorter school days, smaller class sizes, separation between desks, and much, much more. How students react to these changes varies on the student, as well as the school and its choices. Some students report anxiety due to these large changes, while others don't seem to be as worried and impacted. One thing is for sure, though, the new life that we live in will definitely impact the way we see education. Having to go back to virtual. Luckily, students have already prepared for virtual learning from March to June. Some schools that have remained coronavirus-free have reported weeks of time to get used to this new way of going to school. New way of going to school could be a very vague term, but for the most part, it means always wearing a mask to class, quarantining 2 weeks before starting school, shorter school days, smaller class sizes, separation between desks, and much, much more. How students react to these changes varies on the student, as well as the school and its choices. Some students report anxiety due to these large changes, while others don't seem to be as worried and impacted. One thing is for sure, though, the new life that we live in will definitely impact the way we see education. Our first interview is with a private school student going into his sophomore year of high school. Hi, and welcome to the show, Mitchell.
Hi, thank you for having me, Clark.
So let's get straight into it, shall we? The first thing that I would like to know and ask you is, what's your overall opinion on going back to school during this whole coronavirus pandemic? I want to know, like, do you feel that schools should allow students to return to in-person classes, despite the ever so rising case numbers related to the pandemic?
Where I go to school, they are allowing students, and I think that it is okay because of how they are taking the precautions that they need to take to make sure students are socially distancing.
So, could you speak a little more to that and tell me what your school is doing, what precautions they are taking?
Yeah, so every classroom has a limit to the amount of people that can fit in the classroom, and if the class does exceed that limit, um, extra students are chosen to go to what they call a satellite classroom, and they join the class virtually, just from another room that they've designated throughout the school. All the desks have been separated, so students sit no closer than 6 feet apart, and we have been issued masks from our school that we are required to wear at all times. And even though our classes are pretty long, and it can get hot and hard to breathe in those masks, um, our school has definitely heard our voices and decided that each class should give us about 15 minutes out of the class period to take breaks, take off our mask, as long as we're obviously 6 feet apart and not moving around too much to spread it.
So, now that we know what your school is doing, do you agree with your school's choices to go back? Are you feeling safe and represented by your school? And like, do you have a voice in saying that if you don't feel comfortable with this situation, can you change it?
I think our school definitely listens to us. There isn't very much that we can do, as you, I'm sure, understand. But there has been a lot of communication, a lot of decision making, and the students have been a very big part of that. And I am feeling comfortable, safe, as much as hit. I mean, I honestly don't enjoy the precautions, obviously, but they are something that needs to be taken. And so far, they are working actually very well. It surprises me and a lot of other people, but I'm proud of what my school is doing. And I think everyone else is feeling safe that goes to my school.
And before we close, I just want to ask, are you are you keeping safe? Are your classmates keeping their distance? Is everybody around you following these guidelines even when nobody's looking?
Yeah, so knowing a lot of kids, teenagers, younger people, there's definitely a lot of rebelling that people want to do, but the school has managed to keep everyone apart, and I think people do understand that this is what's going to need to happen if we ever want this to go back to normal. There is a lot of stuff that is keeping us from that at the moment, and the best thing we can do to speed that process up, getting back to normal, is to just abide by these rules. And so far, seems like everyone's doing great with that, and um, better than I would expect, to be honest with you.
All right, so that's about all we have for time. But do you have any questions for me before I say goodbye?
I do not.
All right, thank you for your time, Mitchell.
Thank you for having me, Clark.
That was our conversation with Mitchell, a private high school student, talking about his experience with going back to school during the pandemic. We will be right back on Life According to the Middle Schooler after this short break. Welcome back to Life According to a Middle Schooler. Before our short ad break, we talked to Mitchell Kerr, a private high school student, giving us his experience with going back to in-person classes during the coronavirus pandemic. Now that we have spoken to Mitchell and gotten a private standpoint on going back to school during the pandemic, we will speak about what it looks like to go back to school from a public standpoint. After multiple conversations with my friend, a public school student, I managed to compile a moderate amount of information that will help show how public schools are handling going back to school, as well as how the two school types differentiate when it comes to going back. friend attends a public high school with a total student body of about 3,500 students. That is a large number, especially compared to Mitchell's school, who reports enrollment from just 200 students. That is what makes private schools much more capable of going back to these in-person classes. My friend's school is doing a hybrid system for going back to school. That means that 2 days a week he attends in-person classes, 2 days he attends virtual classes, and has 1 day off. This seems to be the most popular way to return to school across the country, but that doesn't make it the easiest. Parents of students that have no access to a bus system will be forced to adapt and drive their students to school, which will also force them to change their work schedule. The problem is, these schools just don't have the capacity, funding, and ability to restrict class size that private schools do have. Even if my friend's school is hybrid, there's still 1,750 students in school per day. With Mitchell's school, 200 students per day can spread around 6 separate buildings, including a 66,000 square foot new addition. Mitchell School has invested in air filtration systems, projectors, microphones, new computers, and smart whiteboards, all for the purpose of returning students to school safely. All of this is possible because of tuition and students' family donations. A public school like my friend's just can't come up with that kind of money as quickly. That is what makes private school have a very positive advantage when it comes to returning to school safely. The last fact that shows how private schools have an advantage is the fact that in some cities, the number of private schools that are reopening is double the number of public schools that are able to reopen safely. This is why so many students and parents are much more comfortable returning to private schools rather than public schools. And although this sounds good, if you're a private school student, it means that the students of lower income families are more likely to contract coronavirus from school because they cannot afford to attend a private school and must attend a public school, which puts students at risk more. Wow, that was a lot of talking. Now that we have explored how returning students to school means different things when it comes to a public school versus private school standpoint, we will end the podcast with my opinion. I personally attend a private middle school of about 120 students. I have been to school for 4 days now, and I am still having a little bit of trouble adjusting to the new standards. My school has taken serious precautions to help prevent coronavirus. They have developed a daily screening system, small class sizes, sanitary stations everywhere, constant mask breaks, and a safe way to play sports, and much, much more. Although all of this has happened, I have still noticed amounts of stress that are greater than usual in me and my classmates. Well, I don't want to talk about myself for too long, so it looks like we'll have to finish our episode here. Thank you so much for listening in to the pilot episode of my new podcast, Life According to a Middle Schooler. If you enjoyed listening today, please share this with your friends and family. Well, it looks like that's all for today, and I just want to give a huge thank you to Anchor for sponsoring this episode. Okay, so I know I just said that I was signing off, but I do want to say, if you guys have any questions, comments, suggestions, or just personal experiences that you want me to share and use or read in the next episodes, feel free to email me. My email is middleschoolpodcaster@gmail.com. I left a link in the description to my email. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, or experiences that you want me to talk about in the next episode, I'd be happy to. So just feel free to shoot me an email.